The burlap sack tore at her palms as Sarah Mitchell heaved with every ounce of strength she possessed, her boots slipping against the dusty floorboards of the general store in Silver Creek, Montana territory. And still the grain refused to budge more than a few inches. It was September of 1878, and the afternoon sun blazed through the storefront windows with merciless intensity. Sweat dripped down Sarah's temples, dampening the collar of her simple cotton dress as she straightened her back and glared at the mountain of grain sacks her late father's business partner had dumped in the middle of the store that morning. 20 sacks, each weighing at least 80 pounds, and every single one needed to be hauled to the storage room before customers arrived for the evening rush. Her father had been dead for 3 months now, taken by a sudden fever that swept through Silver Creek that summer. At 22 years old, Sarah found herself the sole proprietor of Mitchell's General Store, a responsibility that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. She had no brothers to help with the physical labor, no husband to share the burden, and her mother had passed when Sarah was just a girl of 7. The store was all she had left of her father's legacy, and she would be damned if she let it fail, simply because she lacked the physical strength of a man. Sarah bent down again, wrapping her arms around another sack and lifting with her legs the way her father had taught her. The rough burlap scratched against her forearms as she managed to raise it a foot off the ground before her muscles began to shake. She gritted her teeth and took one shuffling step toward the storage room, then another, her face flushing red with exertion. "Need a hand with that, miss?" The deep voice startled her so badly that she nearly dropped the sack on her foot. Sarah looked up to find a tall cowboy standing just inside the doorway, his broad shoulders backlit by the afternoon sun. He removed his worn brown hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, and regarded her with eyes the color of summer grass. "I can manage," Sarah said automatically, even as her arms trembled with the effort of holding the sack. Independence had become her armor in the months since her father's death. Too many men in Silver Creek had offered help that came with conditions, with expectations of gratitude that extended beyond a simple thank you. The cowboy didn't move to leave. Instead, he set his hat on the counter and crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. Before Sarah could protest, he gently took the sack from her arms as though it weighed nothing more than a pillow. "Where do you want it?" Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Pride was one thing, but stupidity was another entirely. She had 19 more sacks to move, and her shoulders already ached something fierce. "Storage room," she said, gesturing to the door at the back of the store, against the far wall. The cowboy nodded and carried the sack away. Sarah watched him go, noting the confident way he moved, the play of muscle beneath his faded blue shirt. He wore dusty chaps over his denim pants and spurs that jingled softly with each step. Everything about him spoke of long days in the saddle and hard work under the open sky. He returned within moments and reached for another sack without being asked. Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. "You don't have to do all of them," she said. "I'm sure you have business to attend to." "Nothing that can't wait." He hoisted another sack onto his shoulder and headed back to the storage room. "Name's Thomas Reed. Most folks call me Tom." "Sarah Mitchell, this is my store." She felt the need to establish that fact clearly. She might accept his help, but she wanted no confusion about who owned this place. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Mitchell." Tom emerged from the storage room and grabbed 2 sacks this time, one in each arm. "Your father was Samuel Mitchell?" Sarah's throat tightened at the mention of her father. "Yes. Did you know him?" "Met him a few times when I passed through Silver Creek. Good man, fair prices and honest dealings." Tom disappeared into the storage room again. "I was sorry to hear of his passing." "Thank you?" The words came out softer than Sarah intended. 3 months had not been enough time to build a callus over her grief. Some days she still expected to see her father behind the counter, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he tallied accounts in his neat handwriting. They fell into a rhythm after that, with Tom doing the heavy lifting, while Sarah directed him and tidied the store. She learned that he worked at the Double R Ranch about 15 miles west of Silver Creek, that he had been cowboying for the better part of 8 years, and that he had come to town to pick up supplies for the ranch's bunkhouse. His voice carried a hint of Texas in its drawl, though he told her he had left the Lone Star State when he was 17 to make his own way in the world. Within half an hour, all 20 sacks sat neatly stacked in the storage room. Tom dusted off his hands and rolled his shoulders, apparently none the worse for the effort. Sarah felt a pang of envy at his easy strength, followed immediately by gratitude. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Reed," she said, moving behind the counter to put a proper barrier between them. Gratitude was fine, but she needed to maintain boundaries. "What supplies were you needing for your ranch?" Tom pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket and handed it over. Cookie made up a list, said if I forgot anything, he'd make sure my coffee was cold for a month. Sarah couldn't help but smile at that. Ranch cooks were notorious for their territorial natures and creative punishments. She scanned the list, mentally cataloging where everything was located. "I can have this ready for you in about 20 minutes. "No rush." Tom leaned against the counter, his green eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. "Can I ask you something, Miss Mitchell?" Sarah's guard went up immediately. Here it comes, she thought, the price for his help. "You can ask. How often do you have to move stock like that on your own?" The question surprised her. She had expected something more personal, more presumptuous. "Often enough. Deliveries come twice a week, sometimes more if I've made special orders." Tom frowned, his brow furrowing beneath the lock of dark hair that fell across his forehead. "That's too much for one person to handle alone." "Well, it's what I have," Sarah said, perhaps more sharply than necessary. "I can't afford to hire help, and I won't sell the store, so I manage." "What if someone helped you regularly?" Tom asked. "Not for pay, just to help." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "And what would you want in return for this charity, Mr. Reed?" Tom had the grace to look confused by her suspicion. "In return? Nothing. I was just thinking that it can't be easy, running this place alone. Seems to me that folks should help each other when they can. In my experience, men don't offer help without expecting something back." Sarah turned away to pull a crate of canned goods from the shelf, though she could feel his gaze on her back. "Usually something I'm not willing to give." There was a long pause. When Tom spoke again, his voice had gone quiet. "I'm sorry someone gave you cause to think that way. But I give you my word, Miss Mitchell, I'm not looking for anything except maybe the satisfaction of doing a decent thing. My mama raised me to help when help is needed, and I can see plain as day that you need it." Sarah set the crate on the counter with more force than necessary, canned peaches rattling inside. She turned to face him, searching his expression for signs of deception or hidden motive. All she saw was honest concern and a slight wounded look, as if her accusation had stung him. "I come to town every Saturday for supplies," Tom continued. "I could stop by and help with whatever heavy work needs doing. If that makes me a few minutes late getting back to the ranch, well, that's my concern, not yours." "The double R wouldn't mind you taking extra time?" Sarah asked, still skeptical. "I do my work and I do it well. The boss won't begrudge me an hour here or there, especially if it's for a good cause." Tom straightened up from the counter. "Think about it at least. You don't have to decide right now." Sarah studied him for a long moment, weighing her suspicion against her practical needs. Pride had kept her warm many a night, but it would not move grain sacks or unload freight wagons. And there was something in Tom Reed's eyes, something steady and genuine, that made her want to trust him, despite her better judgment. "All right," she said finally. "But just help with the heavy work. I don't need charity beyond that." Tom's face broke into a smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made Sarah's heart skip in an entirely inconvenient way. "Yes, ma'am, you've got a deal." She gathered his supplies in a somewhat distracted state, all too aware of his presence as he waited patiently by the counter. When she tallied up his bill, he paid without haggling and loaded everything into the saddlebags of a handsome bay horse tied outside. Before mounting up, he turned back to Sarah, who had followed him to the doorway. "I'll see you next Saturday, Miss Mitchell," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "You just save up the heavy work for me." "I'll probably have freight deliveries on Friday," Sarah heard herself say. "If you wanted to come by Friday evening instead, there would be more to do." Tom's smile widened. "Friday evening it is then." Sarah watched him ride down the dusty main street of Silver Creek, his figure growing smaller against the backdrop of mountains that rose like ancient sentinels in the distance. She felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest, something she had not experienced in a very long time. It frightened her almost as much as it intrigued her. The rest of the week passed in its usual rhythm of customers and inventory, bookkeeping and cleaning. Silver Creek was a town of about 400 souls, scratching out their various livings from ranching, mining, and the trade that passed through on the way to larger settlements. Sarah knew most of her customers by name, knew their habits and their troubles. Mrs. Henderson, who always bought extra sugar and flour because her daughter was courting and wanted to impress the young man with her baking. Old Pete, who purchased tobacco and little else, paying with coins that he claimed came from his mining claim, but which everyone suspected came from odd jobs around town. The Thompson family, with their 6 children, who pressed their noses against the candy jars until their mother relented and bought them each a peppermint stick. Sarah had grown up in this store, had learned arithmetic by counting change and geography, by studying the origins listed on shipping crates. Her father had believed that a good merchant needed to understand both people and products, and he had trained her in both with patient thoroughness. She missed him with an ache that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her, especially in the quiet moments between customers when the store felt too large and too empty. Friday afternoon brought the weekly freight wagon, driven by a grizzled man named Hank, who had been making the Silver Creek run for longer than Sarah had been alive. He and his assistant, a young man barely out of his teens named Billy, unloaded crates and barrels and sacks with the efficiency of long practice, stacking everything in the middle of the store floor for Sarah to sort and shelve. "That's the lot of it," Hank announced, wiping his brow with a faded bandana. "You got a good load this week, Miss Sarah. Looks like them bolts of fabric you ordered finally came in." Sarah signed the delivery receipt and paid Hank his fee. After the wagon pulled away, she stood looking at the mountain of goods that needed to be put away. Crates of canned goods, barrels of flour and sugar, bolts of fabric, as Hank had mentioned, a new shipment of tools, and of course more sacks of grain. Her shoulders sagged just looking at it all. She had sorted about a third of the smaller items when the jingle of spurs announced Tom Reed's arrival. Sarah looked up from the crate of dishes she was unpacking to find him standing in the doorway, hat in hand, the evening light gilding his profile. "Evening, Miss Mitchell," he said. "I see the freight came in." "Mr. Reed." Sarah set down the plate she was holding and wiped her dusty hands on her apron. "You're very punctual." "Yes, ma'am. Where should I start?" For the next 2 hours, they worked together in surprising harmony. Tom handled all the heavy lifting, moving barrels and grain sacks with the same easy strength he had displayed the previous Saturday. Sarah directed traffic and organized, creating order from chaos as the store gradually returned to its proper state. They talked as they worked, small conversations about inconsequential things. Tom told her about life on the Double R, about the ornery bull that had chased him up a tree last week, and the new foal that showed promise as a cutting horse. Sarah found herself telling him about her favorite customers, about the challenges of managing inventory, and the satisfaction of making the accounts balance at the end of each month. The sun had set, and Sarah had lit the oil lamps by the time they finished. The store looked neat and organized, every item in its proper place. Sarah's arms ached from shelving goods, but it was a manageable ache, not the bone-deep exhaustion she usually felt after freight day. "Thank you," she said, meaning it sincerely. "That would have taken me until midnight on my own." Tom shrugged, though he looked pleased by her gratitude. "Happy to help. Same time next Friday? If you're willing." "I am." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Mitchell, I don't suppose you've eaten supper yet." Sarah felt her defenses snap back into place. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate your help, but—" "There's a decent restaurant 2 doors down," Tom interrupted gently. "I'm hungry, you're probably hungry, and it seems a shame to eat alone when there's company to be had. Just a meal between friends, Miss Mitchell. Nothing more, unless you want there to be." Sarah wanted to say no. Every instinct of self-preservation told her to maintain her distance, to accept his help with the store, but keep her personal life firmly separate. But she was tired and hungry, and the thought of going upstairs to her empty apartment above the store to eat cold beans from a can held no appeal whatsoever. "Just a meal," she said firmly. Tom's answering smile was warm but respectful. "Just a meal." The restaurant was a modest establishment called Martha's Place, run by a widow who served simple food prepared well. Tom held the door for Sarah, and they took a table by the window. Several other diners glanced their way with obvious curiosity, and Sarah knew that by tomorrow morning, half of Silver Creek would be speculating about her having dinner with the cowboy from the Double R Ranch. Let them speculate, she thought with uncharacteristic defiance. She was tired of living her life, according to what others might think or say. Martha herself came to take their order, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Tom and Sarah together. "Good evening, Sarah dear. And who's your friend?" "Tom Reed, ma'am," Tom said before Sarah could answer. "I work out at the Double R." "Do you now? Well, Mr. Reed, what can I get for you both?" They ordered pot roast with vegetables, and Martha bustled away to the kitchen. An awkward silence descended on the table. Sarah found herself acutely aware of Tom's presence across from her, of the way the lamplight caught in his dark hair and threw shadows across the strong lines of his jaw. "How long have you been at the Double R?" she asked, desperate to fill the quiet. "Coming up on 2 years now. It's good work, good people. The boss treats his hands fair, and the land is beautiful. Mountains on one side, plains stretching out forever on the other." Tom's expression turned distant, almost wistful. "Sometimes I ride out to check on the herd, and I feel like I can see all the way to tomorrow." "You sound like you love it." "I do. There's something about cowboying that gets in your blood. Every day is different. Every season brings new challenges. Branding in the spring, driving cattle to summer pasture, the fall roundup, keeping the herd safe through winter. It's hard work, but it's honest." He focused on her again. "I imagine running a store has its own rhythms." "It does," Sarah agreed, "though mine involve inventory cycles and freight schedules rather than cattle and seasons." "Do you love it? The store, I mean." The question caught Sarah off guard. She considered it carefully, wanting to give an honest answer. "I love what it represents. My father built that business from nothing, and it was going to be my inheritance. I never expected to run it alone so young, but I won't let it fail. Whether I love the work itself or just the legacy, I'm not entirely sure anymore." Martha returned with their meals before Tom could respond. The food was good and hearty, and they ate in more comfortable silence for a while. Sarah could not remember the last time she had shared a meal with anyone outside of quick lunches with female friends. Certainly she had never dined with a man who was not family or a business acquaintance conducting transactions over food. "Tell me about Texas," she said eventually. "You said you left when you were 17. Tom nodded, swallowing a bite of pot roast. "My family had a small ranch near San Antonio, nothing like the Double R, just enough land to run a modest herd. But my pa had plans for all of us, and his plans and my dreams did not exactly align." "What kind of plans?" "The marrying kind. There was a girl, daughter of a neighboring rancher. Our fathers had decided we would wed, combine the properties, build something bigger together." Tom's expression turned rueful. "Only problem was, neither me nor the girl wanted any part of it. She had her heart set on a shopkeeper in town, and I could not stomach the idea of spending my life doing what I was told just because it was expected. So you left." "So I left, broke my mother's heart, and made my father so angry he told me not to come back. I headed north and west, hired on as a ranch hand, and learned the trade properly. Turned out I had a knack for it." He set down his fork and met her eyes. "Best decision I ever made, though I won't pretend it was easy." Sarah felt a kinship with him in that moment, this man who had also chosen a difficult path to maintain his independence. "Have you been back to see your family?" "Once, about 3 years ago. My mother was glad to see me, and my father had mellowed some with time. The girl I was supposed to marry had wed her shopkeeper and looked happy as could be, so at least that worked out." Tom smiled slightly. "They've mostly forgiven me, I think, or at least accepted that I'm going to live my own life. That must have taken courage, leaving everything familiar, or stupidity. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." Tom's green eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What about you, Miss Mitchell? Did you ever want to do something other than run the store?" The question touched on dreams Sarah had barely acknowledged, even to herself. "When I was younger, I thought about teaching. I loved books and learning, and I imagined having a classroom full of children eager to discover new things. But that was just a girl's fancy. The store needed me, and after my mother passed, my father needed me even more." "Sounds like you gave up your dreams for family duty, just like I refused to." Sarah had never thought of it quite that way, but Tom's words held uncomfortable truth. "Perhaps, but I made my choice willingly, and I don't regret it. My father needed me, and I was glad to help him." "That speaks well of you." Tom's voice was gentle. "But what about now? What are your dreams now?" "Now? Sarah looked out the window at Silver Creek's main street, quiet in the darkness. Now I dream of keeping the store profitable, of maintaining my independence, of proving I can manage on my own. Those are practical dreams, I suppose, but they're mine. Those are good dreams, Tom agreed. But practical dreams and heart dreams are not always the same thing. Before Sarah could formulate a response to that unsettling observation, Martha appeared to clear their plates and offer coffee. They accepted, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Tom told her amusing stories about his fellow ranch hands, about the pranks they played on each other, and the competitions they invented to pass the time. Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in months, the sound surprising her with its spontaneity. When they finally left the restaurant, full dark had fallen over Silver Creek. Stars blazed in the clear Montana sky, more stars than Sarah had ever seen, despite living under them her entire life. Tom walked her the short distance back to the store, his spurs jingling softly in the quiet night. "Thank you for dinner," Sarah said when they reached her door, "and for your help with the freight. The pleasure was mine on both counts." Tom stood with his hat in his hands, looking for all the world like a nervous schoolboy, despite his obvious confidence in most situations. "Miss Mitchell, I wonder if I might be bold enough to ask you something." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "What is it? Would you consider letting me court you properly? Not just helping around the store on Fridays, but actually courting you, taking you to church socials and town dances, maybe riding out to see the countryside when the weather's fine, getting to know each other with intent, if you take my meaning." The words hung in the air between them, fraught with possibility and risk. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from potential heartbreak or disappointment. But as she looked at Tom Reed's earnest face, at the hope and vulnerability in his green eyes, she found she could not immediately dismiss the idea. "I don't know you well enough yet to answer that," she said slowly. "And I've already told you, I'm not looking for a husband. The store takes all my time and energy." "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight," Tom said, a hint of humor creeping into his voice. "I'm just asking for the chance to see if we suit each other. If we don't, well, I'll still help you with the freight on Fridays, and we'll part as friends. But if we do suit each other, Miss Mitchell, wouldn't it be a shame to never find out?" Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, though the night was not particularly cold. Everything Tom said made sense, and yet fear still gripped her heart. Fear of losing her independence, fear of disappointing him, fear of opening herself to pain. But another part of her, a part that had been dormant since her father's death, whispered that maybe, just maybe, taking a chance would be worth the risk. "All right," she heard herself say. "You can court me, Mr. Reed, but I make no promises about where it might lead." Tom's smile could have lit the entire street. "That's all I'm asking for, Miss Mitchell, a chance." He bid her good night and headed toward the livery stable where he had presumably left his horse. Sarah watched him go, then let herself into the dark store. She climbed the stairs to her apartment on shaking legs, her mind whirling with what she had just agreed to. She was being courted by a handsome cowboy who made her laugh and looked at her like she was something precious. The reality of it both thrilled and terrified her. Sleep was a long time coming that night. True to his word, Tom Reed began courting Sarah Mitchell with a determination and gentleness that gradually wore down her defenses. He appeared every Friday to help with the freight, but he also showed up on Sundays to escort her to church, sitting beside her in the pew and singing hymns in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. He brought her wildflowers he had picked on the range, their colors bright against the dusty grays and browns of the town. He found excuses to stop by the store during the week, when ranch business brought him to Silver Creek, always purchasing some small item to justify his presence, but really just wanting to see her smile. October arrived, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Tom convinced Sarah to close the store for an afternoon so he could take her riding into the hills. She had not been on a horse in years, not since her father had sold their old mare due to the cost of keeping her, but Tom was patient as she remembered the feel of it. They rode to a high meadow where they could see for miles, the world spread out below them in breathtaking beauty. "You were right," Sarah said as they sat on a fallen log eating the picnic lunch Tom had brought. "About seeing all the way to tomorrow." Tom looked pleased. "It's something, isn't it? Makes you feel small and big all at the same time. Small because the world is so vast, big because you're part of it all." They sat in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of grief and fear she had carried for months. In Tom's presence, the world seemed less overwhelming, the future less frightening. "My father would have liked you," she said suddenly. "He always said the measure of a man was in how he treated those who could do nothing for him. You've been nothing but kind to me, even when I gave you no encouragement." "You're not exactly an easy woman to help, Miss Mitchell," Tom said, but his tone was teasing rather than critical. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as suspicious." "With good reason," Sarah retorted, but without heat. "You don't know what it's like being a woman alone in business. Every man who offers help seems to think I owe him something in return. I suppose that's fair, but you know by now that I'm not those other men." Sarah did know that. 2 months of Tom's consistent, respectful presence had proven it beyond doubt. He had never pushed her for more than she was willing to give, never made demands or assumptions. When she was tired and short-tempered, he was patient. When she was sad, he was gentle. When she was happy, he seemed to take joy in her joy. "No," she agreed quietly. "You're not like other men at all." November brought the first serious snowfall, and with it a crisis at the store. The roof, which had been patched and repatched over the years, finally gave way under the weight of wet snow. Sarah arrived one morning to find water dripping through the ceiling onto her carefully organized inventory. She stood in the middle of the store and wanted to cry from the sheer overwhelm of it. Tom found her there an hour later, frantically moving goods away from the leak while balancing pots and buckets to catch the drips. He took one look at the situation and immediately swung into action. Within minutes, he had recruited 3 other men from around town, and by afternoon, they had torn off the damaged section of roof and begun repairs. Tom worked through the freezing cold without complaint, hammering shingles while Sarah watched from below with her heart in her throat. By evening, the roof was repaired well enough to hold until a more permanent fix could be made in spring. Sarah insisted on paying the other men for their time, though they protested it was just neighborly help. Tom refused payment entirely, though Sarah argued with him until her voice went hoarse. "I don't want your money," he said firmly as they stood in the store after everyone else had left. His hair was damp with melted snow, his hands red from cold. "I want you to trust that I'm here because I care about you, not because I expect payment." "But you worked all day," Sarah protested. "You'll probably catch your death of cold, and you've certainly earned the anger of your boss for missing a day of work. The boss will understand, and I'll be fine." Tom caught her hands in his larger ones, warming her cold fingers. "Sarah, when are you going to accept that I help you because I want to? Because seeing you happy makes me happy?" It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal Miss Mitchell, and the intimacy of it made Sarah's breath catch. She looked up into his green eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and something deeper, something that made her pulse race. "I'm not used to anyone caring about my happiness except my father," she whispered. "Then get used to it," Tom said gently. "Because I care, Sarah Mitchell. I care more than is probably wise, given that you've made it clear you're not looking for a husband." "I said that in the beginning," Sarah acknowledged, "but things have changed since then." "I've changed." "How so?" Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've come to realize that independence and companionship are not mutually exclusive, that accepting help does not make me weak, that maybe, just maybe, I don't want to face the world alone anymore." Tom's expression blazed with hope. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I care about you too, more than I intended to, more than I thought I could." The words tumbled out in a rush, months of suppressed feeling finding voice at last. "I think about you when you're not here. I look forward to Fridays like a child looks forward to Christmas. When I'm with you, the burden of the store doesn't feel so heavy. You've become essential to me, Tom Reed, and that terrifies me as much as it fills me with joy." Tom pulled her closer, his hands gentle despite their size and strength. "You don't have to be terrified. I'll never do anything to hurt you, Sarah. I swear it on everything I hold dear." "I know," Sarah said, and she realized with surprise that she truly did know it. Tom Reed was as honest and solid as the mountains that surrounded Silver Creek. He was a man of his word, and his word was given to her. "I know you won't." "Can I kiss you?" Tom asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I've wanted to for months, but I needed to know you wanted it too." In answer, Sarah rose on her toes and closed the distance between them herself. Their lips met in a kiss that was both tentative and inevitable, a culmination of months of growing affection and mutual respect. Tom's arms came around her waist, holding her secure as the kiss deepened. Sarah felt as though she were falling and flying all at once, her heart expanding to encompass feelings she had thought lost to her forever. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless, Tom rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Sarah Mitchell. I know it might be too soon to say it, but it's the truth nonetheless." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "It's not too soon. I love you too, Tom. I think I have for a while now, but I was too stubborn to admit it." They stood wrapped in each other's arms as snow began to fall again outside, dusting the streets of Silver Creek with fresh white. Sarah felt a peace settle over her that she had not known since her father's death. She was not alone anymore. She had found someone who valued her strength while supporting her weaknesses, who admired her independence while offering partnership. As winter deepened, so did their relationship. Tom began spending nearly all his free time in Silver Creek, helping Sarah with the store and courting her with steady devotion. They attended the town's Christmas social together, dancing until Sarah's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. On Christmas Eve, Tom gave her a music box he had sent away for, a delicate thing with a painted ballerina that twirled to a sweet melody. Sarah gave him a new pair of riding gloves lined with sheepskin, along with a scarf she had knitted herself during quiet evenings alone. The winter was harsh that year, with storms that sometimes kept Tom at the ranch for weeks at a time. Sarah missed him desperately during those separations, and the joy of his return was all the sweeter for the waiting. They wrote letters to each other, Tom's prose simple but heartfelt, Sarah's more eloquent but no less sincere. She kept his letters in a ribbon-tied bundle in her dresser drawer and read them when she felt lonely. In February, during a brief thaw between storms, Tom rode into town with a purpose that was evident in every line of his body. He found Sarah in the store, helping Mrs. Henderson select fabric for a new dress. He waited patiently while Sarah completed the transaction, his hat turning round and round in his hands. "You're nervous," Sarah observed once they were alone. "What's wrong? Is everything all right at the ranch?" "The ranch is fine. Everyone's fine." Tom set his hat on the counter with an air of decision. "Sarah, I can't wait any longer. I've been as patient as I know how to be, and I think you know my feelings by now, but I need to ask you properly." Sarah's heart began to pound. "Ask me what?" Tom reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light. "I know you value your independence. I know you've built a life here that's all your own. But I'm asking if you'll let me be part of that life permanently. Marry me, Sarah. Be my wife. Let me help you with the store and build a future together. I swear I'll never try to take away what's yours or make you less than you are. I just want to stand beside you through whatever comes." Sarah stared at the ring, her thoughts tumbling over each other. Marriage meant legal entanglements, meant a man having rights over her property and person. But it also meant partnership, companionship, love. And this was Tom, who had proven himself time and again to be trustworthy and good. "The store would still be mine?" she asked, needing to hear it clearly. "Yours entirely. I'll help run it if you want, or I'll stay out of it if you prefer. Whatever makes you happy." Tom's voice was steady, despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "And if I take a job that keeps me at the ranch, we'll figure that out too. I'm marrying you, Sarah, not your business, though I'll love the business because it's part of you." "What about children?" Sarah asked. "Do you want them?" "I do, if you do. But if you don't, or if the Lord chooses not to bless us with them, I'll still consider myself the luckiest man in Montana Territory to have you as my wife." Sarah realized she was crying, tears sliding down her cheeks unchecked. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Tom Reed." Tom's whoop of joy could probably be heard throughout Silver Creek. He swept Sarah into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he finally set her down, he slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "We'll have to make plans," Sarah said, her practical nature asserting itself even through her happiness. "I'll need to find someone to watch the store during the ceremony, and we should probably wait until spring when travel is easier." "Whatever you want," Tom agreed readily, "though I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd let me." "Let's aim for April," Sarah decided. "After the spring thaw, but before freight gets too busy." They were married on a bright April morning in 1879 in Silver Creek's small church with half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had ordered special from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Tom wore a new suit that he was clearly uncomfortable in, though he looked devastatingly handsome. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, and Sarah's voice was steady as she spoke her vows, promising to love and honor the man who had proven himself worthy of both. The reception was held in the town hall, with food contributed by various townspeople and music provided by a fiddler and guitar player who struck up lively tunes. Sarah danced with her new husband until her feet ached, then danced some more, because she could not bear to leave the circle of his arms. When Tom whispered that perhaps they should slip away to begin their wedding night, Sarah agreed with a blush that made him grin. They had decided to live in the apartment above the store, at least for the time being. Tom had already moved his few possessions in, his clothes hanging beside Sarah's in the wardrobe that had belonged to her parents. It was strange and wonderful to share her space with someone, to have Tom's boots by the door and his hat on the hook, and his presence filling the rooms that had been lonely for so long. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and ultimately beautiful, two people learning each other's bodies and hearts. Tom was gentle with Sarah's inexperience, patient as they fumbled their way toward mutual pleasure. When they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, Sarah felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. "I love you, Mrs. Reed," Tom murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Sarah whispered back. "Though, I think I'll keep using Mitchell for the store. Mitchell's General Store has a long history, and I'd hate to change it." Tom chuckled. "Whatever makes you happy, wife. You could call it Sarah's Store, or the best store in Montana, or anything else you pleased, and I'd still be proud to stand beside you." Marriage changed Sarah's life in ways both large and small. She woke each morning to Tom's presence, to his sleepy smile and morning kisses. They shared breakfast and planned their days, Tom heading out to the ranch while Sarah opened the store. On the nights when Tom could not make it back to town due to work or weather, Sarah missed him, with an ache that surprised her with its intensity. But when he returned, the joy of reunion made the separation worthwhile. Tom proved as good as his word about the store. He helped with heavy work and offered suggestions when asked, but he never tried to take control or override Sarah's decisions. When customers occasionally tried to go over Sarah's head to speak with her husband, Tom politely but firmly directed them back to his wife. The store was hers, and he made sure everyone knew it. As spring turned to summer, Sarah began to suspect she might be pregnant. By July, her suspicions were confirmed by the town's doctor, a gruff but competent man who told her the baby would likely arrive in late January or early February. Sarah was simultaneously elated and terrified. She had no memory of her own mother's parenting, no female relatives to guide her through pregnancy and childbirth. When she told Tom the news, he lifted her off her feet despite her protests about being careful. "We're going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder thick in his voice. "We're going to have a baby." "I don't know the first thing about being a mother," Sarah confessed as he gently set her down. "What if I'm terrible at it?" "You'll be wonderful," Tom said with complete confidence. "You're smart and capable and full of love. Our child will be lucky to have you as a mother." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from nausea that lasted well into her 4th month. And by autumn, she was so large and uncomfortable that even walking across the store felt like an ordeal. She hired a young woman named Jenny to help with the heavier work. Though Sarah still insisted on managing the accounts and dealing with customers, Tom hovered anxiously whenever he was in town, until Sarah finally snapped at him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I'm having a baby, not dying," she said irritably one evening in the late December. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman having my baby," Tom retorted. "That's entirely different and justifies all the hovering I please." Despite her discomfort and occasional irritability, Sarah found herself deeply content. She placed Tom's hand on her swollen belly so he could feel the baby kick, and the look of awe on his face made her fall in love with him all over again. They spent evenings planning for their child, debating names and arguing playfully about whose features the baby would inherit. In early February of 1880, during a particularly brutal cold snap, Sarah's labor began in the early hours of the morning. Tom rode through freezing darkness to fetch the doctor and the midwife, his heart in his throat the entire way. By the time he returned, Sarah was in the capable hands of the midwife, a stern woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered half the babies in Silver Creek. Tom was banished to the store below, where he paced and worried and prayed while Sarah labored above. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Each cry he heard from upstairs made him want to rush to Sarah's side, but Mrs. Patterson had been very clear that he would only be in the way. He had never felt so helpless in his entire life. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard a new sound, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. Tom's knees nearly buckled with relief. He waited, every muscle tense, until Mrs. Patterson appeared at the top of the stairs. "You can come up now," she said. "You have a son." Tom took the stairs 3 at a time. He burst into the bedroom to find Sarah propped against pillows, exhausted and pale, but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Tom approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his child for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Tom had ever seen, aside from Sarah herself. "He's perfect," Tom whispered, sinking down on the edge of the bed. "You're both perfect." "Meet your son, Tom." Sarah carefully transferred the baby into his father's arms. "I thought we might call him Samuel after my father." Tom looked down at his son, at little Samuel Reed, and felt his eyes burn with tears. "That's a good name, a strong name." He glanced at Sarah, overwhelmed with love for this woman who had given him so much. "Thank you, for him, for everything. I'm the luckiest man alive." "We're both lucky," Sarah said softly. "We found each other." Parenthood transformed them both in unexpected ways. Tom took a leave from the ranch for the first month, wanting to be present as they all adjusted to life with a baby. Samuel was a good baby, generally content unless hungry or wet, and he seemed to have inherited his father's even temperament. Sarah proved to be a natural mother despite her fears, intuiting what Samuel needed with an ease that surprised her. When Tom finally returned to work, they developed a new routine. Tom spent several nights a week at the ranch, particularly during busy seasons, but he always came home to his family as often as possible. Sarah managed the store with Jenny's continued help, keeping Samuel in a cradle behind the counter where she could watch him while she worked. The people of Silver Creek doted on the baby, and Sarah lost count of the gifts of knitted blankets and hand-carved toys that appeared. The years that followed were full of the ordinary joys and challenges of family life. Samuel grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved nothing more than trailing after his father when Tom was home. In 1882, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they called James after Tom's father. The apartment above the store grew crowded with the expanding family, but neither Sarah nor Tom minded the chaos. In 1885, when Samuel was 5 and ready to start school, Tom made a decision. He left his position at the Double R Ranch and took over more of the daily operation of the store, allowing Sarah to focus more on the children without giving up her role as proprietor. It was a change they had discussed at length, weighing the financial implications and the shift in their family dynamics. But Tom had discovered that he enjoyed storekeeping more than he had expected, and the regular hours meant he could be present for his children in ways that cowboying had not allowed. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked the night before Tom's last day at the ranch. "I know you love being a cowboy." "I loved it," Tom agreed, "but I love you and our children more, and there's something to be said for building a business instead of just working for someone else. Mitchell's General Store is going to be our children's legacy, Sarah. That's worth more than any day on the range." So, Tom became a storekeeper, and if he sometimes missed the open sky and the rhythm of life on the ranch, he never said so. He threw himself into learning the business side of things, with the same determination he had once applied to learning to rope and ride. Sarah taught him bookkeeping and inventory management, and he proved to have a natural head for numbers that surprised them both. The store prospered under their joint management. Tom's easygoing nature with customers complemented Sarah's more businesslike approach, and people seemed to appreciate doing business with a family concern. They expanded the store in 1887, buying the adjacent building and knocking down the wall between to create a larger space. The growth allowed them to carry more inventory and serve their customers better. and Silver Creek itself was growing as more settlers arrived in Montana. In 1889, Sarah gave birth to their fourth and final child, another daughter they named Grace. At 33 years old, Sarah decided she was content with their family as it was. 4 healthy children, a thriving business, and a husband who still looked at her with love after 10 years of marriage. She had more than she had ever dreamed possible on that September day when Tom had first walked into her store. Samuel, at 9 years old, was already showing an aptitude for business that pleased Sarah immensely. He loved helping in the store, carefully stacking cans and sweeping floors with serious concentration. Rose, at 7, was a dreamer who preferred books to chores, but who could charm customers into buying things they had not planned to purchase. James, at 5, was all energy and mischief, keeping his parents constantly alert. And baby Grace was a contented infant who seemed to find joy in everything. Life was not without its challenges. There were lean years when drought or harsh winters affected the local ranchers and miners who were their customer base. There were illnesses and accidents, the normal trials of raising children. In 1891, a fire broke out in a building down the street, and only the quick action of the volunteer fire brigade saved half of Silver Creek's business district, including Mitchell's General Store. Through it all, Sarah and Tom faced each challenge together. They argued sometimes, as any couple does, usually about money or parenting decisions or how to handle difficult customers. But they never went to bed angry, and they never let disagreements fester into resentment. The foundation they had built in those early days of courtship, of mutual respect and genuine affection, proved strong enough to weather any storm. As the 19th century drew to a close, Sarah sometimes thought back to the frightened, stubborn young woman she had been when Tom first walked into her store. That woman had been so determined to handle everything alone, so convinced that accepting help was a weakness. She had built walls around her heart to protect herself from pain and disappointment. Tom had dismantled those walls brick by brick, with patience and gentleness and unwavering devotion. He had shown her that strength and vulnerability could coexist, that asking for help was not surrender, but wisdom. He had given her a love she had not known she needed, and a family she had not dared to dream of. One evening in the summer of 1898, after the children were all in bed and the store was closed for the night, Sarah and Tom sat together on the small porch behind their apartment. It was a beautiful night, the air soft and warm, stars spreading across the sky in their millions. They sat in companionable silence, Tom's arm around Sarah's shoulders, both of them content in each other's presence. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Giving up cowboying to be a storekeeper?" Tom was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss it," he admitted. "But I don't regret the choice. How could I, when it gave me so much? I have you, our children, a good life. Those things are worth more than all the days on the range in the world." "I never thanked you properly," Sarah said, "for that first day, when you helped me with the grain sacks. You changed my entire life with that one act of kindness." "I think we changed each other's lives." Tom pulled her closer. "You taught me that there's more than one way to be a man, that building a home can be just as satisfying as building a herd. You gave me purpose beyond just the next day's work." "We've had a good life together, haven't we?" "The best life," Tom agreed. "And we're not done yet. We still have years ahead of us, watching our children grow and maybe even meeting grandchildren someday." Sarah smiled at the thought. Samuel was 14 now, on the cusp of young manhood. In a few years, he might well be courting some young woman and starting the cycle anew. The thought filled her with a bittersweet mixture of pride and nostalgia. "I love you, Tom Reed," she said, the words as true as they had been nearly 20 years ago. "Thank you for seeing past my stubbornness and loving me anyway." "I didn't love you anyway," Tom corrected gently. "I loved you, stubbornness and all. It's part of who you are, and who you are is wonderful." They sat together as the night deepened, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. The Wild West of Tom's cowboying days was slowly giving way to a more settled, civilized era. Towns like Silver Creek were growing, becoming permanent fixtures with schools and churches and all the trappings of established society. The frontier was closing, the old ways fading, but some things remained constant: love, family, the satisfaction of honest work, the comfort of a partner who knew you inside and out and chose to stay anyway. The joy of watching your children grow and thrive. The quiet contentment of a life well lived. Samuel appeared in the doorway, a lanky teenager in his nightshirt. "Can't sleep," he announced. "Too hot." "Come sit with us," Sarah invited, moving over to make room. Samuel squeezed between his parents, and Tom ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "Did I ever tell you about the day I met your mother?" Tom asked. "Only about 100 times," Samuel said, but he was smiling. She was trying to lift grain sacks that weighed more than she did. "It was a sight to see," Tom said, his voice warm with the memory. "This tiny woman, determined to move a mountain of grain all by herself. I knew right then that she was special." "You did not," Sarah protested. "You thought I was stubborn and possibly crazy." "Stubborn, yes. Crazy, no. I thought you were brave and independent and more beautiful than any woman I'd ever seen." Tom dropped a kiss on top of her head. "Still do." Samuel made a face at his parents' affection, but his expression was fond. "So you helped her, and then you fell in love, and here we all are." "More or less," Tom agreed, though there was a bit more to it than that. "He asked to help forever," Sarah said softly. "That first day, he asked if he could help forever, and I told him just help with the heavy work, but he helped with everything. He helped me learn to trust again, to love again, to believe in partnership and family." "And now you're stuck with all of us," Samuel teased. "Stuck is not the word I would use," Tom said. "Blessed, maybe. Lucky, definitely." Rose appeared in the doorway next, drawn by the sound of voices. "What are we talking about?" "How your father and I met," Sarah said, welcoming her daughter into the circle. "Oh, I love that story," Rose sighed, romantic as always. Soon James and even little Grace had joined them on the porch, the whole family squeezed together in the warm night. Tom told the story once again, embellishing certain details and making the children laugh with his exaggerated description of their mother's fierce independence. Sarah added her own perspective, talking about how frightened she had been to accept help, how Tom had proven himself patient and trustworthy. The children listened with the attention they always gave to this particular story, their family's origin tale. This was how they had all come to be, this chance meeting between a struggling storekeeper and a helpful cowboy. One act of kindness had rippled outward, creating a family, a legacy, a love that would endure beyond the lives of its original architects. As the night grew late and the children began to yawn, Sarah and Tom shepherded them all back to bed. They moved through the familiar routine of tucking in and saying goodnights, of checking locks and banking the stove. Finally, they retreated to their own bedroom, to the bed they had shared for nearly 2 decades. "Do you think they'll remember these times?" Sarah asked as she brushed out her hair, now threaded with silver at the temples. "When they're grown with children of their own?" "I hope so," Tom said from where he sat on the edge of the bed, removing his boots. "I hope they remember that love is worth working for, that family is the greatest treasure, that helping someone can change both your lives." Sarah set down her brush and turned to face her husband. Age had marked him too, lines around his eyes and gray in his dark hair, but to her he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him silhouetted in the doorway of her store. "Come to bed, cowboy," she said with a smile. Tom grinned and complied, pulling her close once they were both beneath the covers. "I'm a storekeeper now, remember?" "You'll always be my cowboy," Sarah said firmly. "The one who rode into my life and changed everything." They fell asleep in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that, whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The Wild West might be fading into history, but the love they had built would endure. It would live on in their children and their children's children, a legacy more valuable than gold or land or any material wealth. Outside, Silver Creek slept beneath the stars, a small town in a vast territory that was slowly becoming a state. In a few years, Montana would officially join the Union, bringing with it all the changes of the new century. But in Sarah and Tom's bedroom, above Mitchell's general store, 2 people rested peacefully, their story complete and yet still unfolding with each new day. They had found each other by chance and chosen each other deliberately. They had built a life from nothing more than determination and love. They had faced challenges and celebrated victories, weathered storms and basked in sunshine. And through it all, from that first day when a cowboy had helped a struggling woman with heavy grain sacks to this moment 20 years later, they had done it together. That was the real story, Sarah thought drowsily as sleep claimed her. Not the dramatic moments or the grand gestures, but the everyday choice to stand beside each other through whatever came. The quiet heroism of showing up, of helping, of loving even when it was difficult. Tom had asked to help forever, and Sarah had let him. In doing so, they had both found exactly what they needed: a partner, a love, a home. Forever had seemed like such a daunting word that September day in 1878, but now, lying beside her husband in 1898, Sarah understood that forever was not a burden, it was a gift. The years continued to unfold with steady grace. The 20th century arrived with celebrations throughout Silver Creek, the whole town gathering to mark the turning of the calendar and speculate about what the new era would bring. Samuel, at 19, had become indispensable in running the store, showing a business acumen that sometimes surprised even his mother. He had his father's easy way with people combined with his mother's sharp mind for figures. In the spring of 1901, Samuel brought home a young woman named Elizabeth Carter, the daughter of a banker from the next town over. Sarah watched her eldest son stumble through an awkward introduction and recognized the same mixture of nervousness and hope that Tom must have felt all those years ago. Elizabeth was a sensible, kind young woman with a quick smile and intelligent eyes. Sarah approved immediately, and over the following months, the courtship blossomed. "He reminds me of someone," Tom said one evening as they watched Samuel leave to take Elizabeth for a ride. "Can't quite place who." Sarah laughed and swatted his arm. "He's your son through and through. Did you see how carefully he helped her into the buggy? How he looks at her like she hung the moon." "I still look at you that way," Tom protested. "I know you do." Sarah kissed his cheek. "That's why I love you." Samuel and Elizabeth married in the fall of 1902, in a ceremony even larger than Sarah and Tom's had been. The young couple moved into a house 2 streets over, close enough for Samuel to continue working at the store, but far enough to establish their own household. Within a year, they had made Sarah and Tom grandparents with the birth of a daughter named Margaret. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Sarah felt the circle of life complete itself in a profound way. This tiny being carried pieces of Sarah's father, of Sarah herself, of Tom, of Samuel. She was the next generation, the continuation of the story that had begun with grain sacks and a helpful cowboy. Rose, at 21, had developed into a beautiful young woman with her mother's determination and her father's charm. She shocked the family in 1903 by announcing her intention to become a teacher, pursuing the dream that Sarah had set aside so long ago. Sarah could have objected, could have insisted that Rose help with the store or focus on finding a husband. Instead, she encouraged her daughter wholeheartedly, even helping to pay for the additional education Rose needed. "You're giving her what you gave up," Tom observed one evening after Rose had left for her first teaching position in a town 50 miles away. "I'm giving her what she wants," Sarah corrected. "My dream became running the store alongside you. Her dream is different, and that's how it should be." James, at 17, had proven to be the adventurous one. He talked constantly of heading further west to California, of seeing the ocean and making his fortune. Sarah worried about him, but tried not to let it show. Boys needed to find their own paths, even when those paths led far from home. Grace, the baby at 12 years old, was a happy child who seemed to have inherited the best qualities of both her parents. She loved the store and loved her family in equal measure, content with her life in Silver Creek in a way that suggested she might stay close to home. The store continued to thrive as Silver Creek grew. Montana had achieved statehood in 1889, bringing increased stability and growth to the region. The railroad had reached Silver Creek in 1895, making freight deliveries easier and opening up new markets for local ranchers and merchants. Mitchell's General Store had survived the transition from frontier outpost to established town, adapting to changing times while maintaining its core identity. In 1905, Tom and Sarah celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary, with a party attended by what seemed like half of Silver Creek. They stood together in the town hall, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors, and Sarah marveled at how far they had come. The frightened young widow and the helpful cowboy had built something lasting and good. "Speech!" someone called out, and others took up the cry. Tom looked at Sarah, who nodded her permission. He stood and cleared his throat, suddenly looking as nervous as he had on their wedding day. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, "but I figure on an occasion like this, a few words are in order." The room fell quiet, everyone turning their attention to Tom. Sarah watched her husband with love and pride, this man who had been her rock for more than a quarter century. 26 years ago, I walked into Sarah's store and saw her trying to lift grain sacks that probably weighed as much as she did, Tom said. I offered to help, and she reluctantly let me. That was the smartest thing I ever did, offering to help. And the smartest thing she ever did was eventually letting me help with more than just the heavy lifting. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sarah felt her eyes begin to sting with tears. We've had a good life together, Tom continued. We've faced hard times and celebrated good times. We've raised 4 wonderful children and started to see grandchildren. We've built a business and a home. And through all of it, Sarah has been my partner in every sense of the word. She's made me a better man than I ever thought I could be. He turned to Sarah, extending his hand to her. She took it and stood beside him, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. I asked you once if I could help forever, Tom said softly, speaking to her rather than to the crowd now. You said yes, and you've given me the best life a man could ask for. Here's to the next 26 years, my love. To the next 26 years, Sarah echoed, her voice thick with emotion. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Samuel raised a toast, and then everyone was drinking to the happy couple. The celebration lasted late into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Sarah danced with Tom, with her sons, with Samuel's little Margaret, who stood on her grandfather's feet and giggled as he waltzed her around. As the party finally wound down, and they walked home through the quiet streets of Silver Creek, Sarah leaned against Tom's solid presence and reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Every struggle had been worth it. Every challenge had made them stronger. Every moment of joy had been magnified by having someone to share it with. The years that followed brought both happiness and sorrow, as years do. In 1907, James made good on his promises and headed to California, breaking his mother's heart even as she supported his choice. He wrote regular letters that Sarah treasured, detailing his adventures and eventual success in the lumber trade. In 1909, Rose married a fellow teacher, a quiet man named David who clearly adored her. They settled in the town where Rose taught, giving Sarah and Tom another grandchild to dote on. Grace grew into a lovely young woman who did indeed stay in Silver Creek, eventually taking over more and more of the store's daily operation as Sarah and Tom began to slow down with age. In 1911, at 19, Grace married a local rancher's son, and their wedding was a joyful affair that reminded Sarah achingly of her own wedding day decades earlier. Samuel proved to be an excellent businessman, expanding the store's operations and eventually opening a second location in the next county over. By 1913, Mitchell's General Store had become something of a small empire, providing a comfortable living for the entire family. Sarah took pride in knowing that her father's legacy had not just survived, but thrived under her stewardship, and then Samuel's. Tom remained her constant companion through all of life's changes. They grew old together, silver hair and creaking joints, and the comfortable familiarity of people who had shared a life. They still held hands when they walked. They still kissed goodnight every evening. They still looked at each other with love that had only deepened with time. In the spring of 1915, approaching their 36th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Tom sat together on a bench outside the store. They were both in their late 50s now, still healthy but feeling their age. The store was being minded by Grace and her husband, giving Sarah and Tom the freedom to take it easy more often. Do you remember that first day? Sarah asked, watching the bustling street of Silver Creek. The town had electric lights now, and automobiles sometimes puttered past alongside horses and wagons. The world was changing rapidly, but some things remained constant. Every detail, Tom said. You had dust on your nose and determination in your eyes. I thought you were the most magnificent thing I'd ever seen. I was angry that I needed help, Sarah admitted, so determined to prove I could do everything alone. You could have, Tom said. You're the strongest person I know, but I'm glad you didn't have to. So am I. Sarah laid her head on his shoulder, a gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. Thank you for being so persistent, for not giving up even when I made it difficult. You were worth every bit of effort, Tom assured her. You still are. They sat in peaceful silence, watching their world go by. Margaret, Samuel's daughter, ran past chasing a hoop, her laughter bright in the afternoon air. A customer entered the store, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, announcing arrivals and departures. "We've had a good life," Sarah said quietly. "The best life," Tom agreed. "And we're not done yet." He was right, of course. They had years left to them, years of watching their family grow, of seeing their grandchildren have children of their own, years of sitting together in comfortable silence or engaging in spirited debate, years of small joys and quiet moments, of ordinary days made extraordinary by being shared. The Wild West of Sarah's youth was long gone, transformed into established communities and modern conveniences. But the love that had been forged in that rougher time remained strong and true. It had sustained them through everything life threw at them, and it would continue to sustain them for whatever time they had left. As the afternoon light began to slant toward evening, Tom stood and offered Sarah his hand. "Come on, my love. Let's head upstairs and see what we can rustle up for supper." Sarah took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, the gesture an echo of countless times he had helped her up over the years. "You're going to cook? This I have to see." "Hey now, I've learned a thing or two in the kitchen over the years," Tom protested with mock indignation. They walked into the store together, greeting Grace and her husband, checking on a few small things out of habit rather than necessity. Then they climbed the stairs to the apartment that had been their home for so long, where they had raised their children and built their life. In the kitchen, Tom did indeed cook supper, a simple meal, but a competent one. They ate at the table by the window, talking about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. They discussed Margaret's progress in school, speculated about when James might visit from California, debated whether the new minister was as good a preacher as the old one. After supper, they settled in the small sitting room. Tom read the newspaper while Sarah worked on mending, the domestic scene utterly ordinary and utterly perfect. When darkness fell, they prepared for bed with the efficient routine of long practice. Lying together in the darkness, Sarah thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A difficult delivery that her father's business partner had left for her to handle alone. A cowboy who had walked in at just the right moment. An offer of help that had turned into an offer of forever. "Tom," she whispered into the darkness. His voice was drowsy but attentive. "I'm glad you asked to help forever. It was the best question anyone ever asked me." Tom's arms tightened around her. "I'm glad you eventually said yes. Best answer I ever got." They fell asleep that way, as they had for thousands of nights before, and would for many nights to come. Two people who had found each other against the odds and held on tight. Two people who had taken a chance on love and built something beautiful from it. Outside, Silver Creek slept beneath a canopy of stars. The mountains stood eternal in the distance. Somewhere in the night, a coyote called to the moon. Life went on, as it always did, in cycles of birth and death, joy and sorrow, endings and beginnings. But in the apartment above Mitchell's General Store, Sarah and Tom Reed rested in peace and perfect contentment. Their story had started with heavy grain sacks and a simple offer of help. It had blossomed into love and partnership, grown into family and legacy. And it would continue in their children and their children's children, long after Sarah and Tom themselves had passed into memory. Because the best stories, the ones worth telling around kitchen tables and passing down through generations, are not about grand adventures or dramatic gestures. They are about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, about kindness offered and accepted, about love that persists through every challenge, about two people who decided to face life together and found that together was the best way to face anything at all. Tom had asked to help forever, and Sarah had let him. In doing so, they had both found their forever, and that, more than anything else, was the happy ending they had built together one day. One choice, one shared moment at a time.